Welcome to the application walkthrough for the Washington State Historical Society's Heritage Capital Projects Grant Program. In order to begin an application, you must have an account through the Heritage Portal. You can watch the introduction and training video for the Heritage Portal if you need assistance with registering and creating an account. Once you've logged in, take a moment to check each of your 3 profiles to make sure the information is still correct, especially if you are returning to the portal for the first time in a while. Click on Organizations to see your organization profile and make sure all the business information is correct, and especially that the primary contact person is the correct person. Click on People to see your individual profile to make sure your individual contact information is current, especially if you are the primary contact. And click on Properties to look at your property profile to make sure all the information listed about the individual property you are going to request a grant for is still correct and that all the fields are filled out. If you need assistance adding a new property profile, check out the Heritage Portal instruction and training video I mentioned previously, starting at about the 5-minute and 30-second timestamp. Once you have confirmed that all your profile information is up to date, you will find a link to begin an application in the left-hand menu under the Information heading. Click on Apply for Heritage Capital Projects. As you will see on the Heritage Capital Projects landing page, it is essential to read the full guidelines document carefully before beginning your grant application. Once you've thoroughly reviewed the guidelines and are confident that you meet all the grant parameters, click on the button to start an HCP grant application. You will then see the form for Stage 1 of the Heritage Capital Projects Grant Program, the Eligibility Review. At the top, there is a header, which will summarize your grant information once it is filled in. Next are some portal instructions you might find useful. Then comes the table of contents. This table links to each section so you can quickly jump to the area you want to focus on. When you are navigating through the sections of the application form, you can choose to collapse them for easier scrolling. The first section is organization information, where you will select a name for each role listed. These drop-down menus are populated by the individual people profiles in the Heritage Portal who are connected to your organization. The same individual may be listed in multiple roles if that is appropriate for the organization and the project, except the additional contact, which must be a different individual than the others listed. The primary contact is the person who will coordinate with HCP program staff for the administrative purposes of this grant, such as finalizing the contract, coordinating grant payments, submitting reports, etc. The authorized signatory is the person authorized by the organization's governing body to sign the grant contract on behalf of the governing body. The project manager is the person who will manage the capital work of the grant project, and the additional contact should be a person different than any of the others listed above and someone who has a working knowledge of the capital project and will be able to provide information to HCP program staff should the above persons be unavailable. Next, you will upload the required organizational documents. This is the first of 3 document areas on this form, which are organizational documents, consultation documents, and project documents. In the full proposal, Stage 2, there will be a 4th document area for uploading images. Be sure to review the document requirements in the guidelines and gather the required attachments before beginning your application. We recommend that you organize your documents in folders that correspond to the types for easier uploading. To add documents to the application form, click on the plus button to the right of the document title. A window will pop open where you can either drag and drop your files or use the Add Files button to browse through your folders. Once the file is listed in the pop-up window, hit the Start Upload button. When the Upload Complete message shows in the bottom left corner, you can close the window. You can see now that the file is uploaded in the Uploaded Organization Documents box with the file name and labeled with the document type. That document type has also disappeared from the list above. You can also add multiple documents in one pop-up window. If you need to add another document for a file type that is no longer displaying in the list, use the plus button on the upload box itself. Be sure to select the correct document type from the drop-down list. You can see that all of these current financial statements are still grouped together. It is good practice to periodically save your work in the portal as you go by using the Save and Continue button. The next section is your request summary. Enter a project title using short, descriptive words that includes the name of your site. Then select your associated property from the drop-down menu. If you do not see your property in the drop-down menu, that means you have not yet created a profile for it, which is required. To create a property profile, save and close this form and add one on your organization record. There are further instructions in the introductory and training video. Then enter the legislative district where the property is located. Next, you will select what type of project you are proposing. If your project can be classified as more than one of the options in the drop-down menu, select the one that identifies what most of the grant funds will be spent to do. If you select something from that project type menu that is not related to historic properties, you must answer the next question about whether any part of your project, including work that will be matched, involves a property or asset that is more than 45 years old or could otherwise be considered historically significant. An example of when you would check yes is if you have a site with multiple buildings, some historic, but you are requesting support for one of the newer structures, or if you're requesting funds for architecture or engineering services for a historic building. If you select something having to do with historic facilities, that question will disappear. Next, provide a succinct description of your overall grant project proposal in 1 or 2 sentences. Notice that there's a character limit for this field. This is just a summary for easy reference. You will have the chance to describe your project in greater detail in stage 2. The next section is selecting geographic focus, meaning identifying the location of the subject property for mapping purposes. Hit Save and Continue if you don't see the geographic area listed right away. The next section is information about related state projects or funding. The first question asks if you have received state funding for this project or a closely related project in the past. The second question asks if you are seeking other state funding in addition to Heritage Capital projects for this same upcoming budget cycle. If you select yes to either question, enter the details requested. Please note that your project may be ineligible to apply for HCP funding if you are seeking other concurrent state funding for the same or a closely related project. Consult with staff if this is a potential issue for you. Next, you will document your consultation with potentially affected tribes and the Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation, also known as DAP, as per the requirements of Executive Order 2102. For more information about which tribes you should be reaching out to, visit the DAP website. This page will give you lots of information and show you a map of which tribes would like to be contacted for your project location. For instance, in Tacoma, as you scroll through, you can see the land areas identified for each tribe with the outlines that change. Once you have initiated contact with the tribes, begin filling out the table to document each instance of outreach. Use the plus button to add a line. Then list the date you initiated consultation with DAP. The date of determination and the determination itself are not due until stage 2, the full proposal, but you can enter them now if you are that far along in your consultation with DAP. And finally, the attachments. You should upload documentation of all outreach effort to tribes and DAP. Remember, you can add multiple files in one pop-up window. This is a good time to save your work. The next section is cost categories. There are 3 cost categories. Construction and rehabilitation is the category most projects will use. This includes all construction and rehabilitation work, whether the project is for a historic building or a non-historic building. This is basically all the physical work done to the facility. The next category is any design or pre-construction work necessary for the construction or rehabilitation to take place. This includes historic structures reports, structural engineering reports, underwater surveys, architectural design and drawings, etc. And finally, the third category is property acquisition. Within each of these three categories, you need to divide up your grant request, your cash match, and your in-kind match. Under construction and rehabilitation, cash match would be the amount you anticipate spending out of your funds paying contractors and purchasing materials for the physical work. The in-kind match would be the value of any donated labor or materials you anticipate going toward the project, such as volunteer hours. And HCP grant dollars would be the amount you anticipate spending in grant dollars paying contractors and purchasing materials to do the physical work. Under design and pre-construction, cash match would be any amount you anticipate spending out of your funds to pay consultants, engineers, and architects. In-kind would be the value of any of those services you anticipate will be donated. Remember that to claim a professional rate as an in-kind donation, you will need to document that that person donating the services works professionally in that area. And HCP grant dollars would be the amount you anticipate spending in grant dollars paying for any of those professional services. And under property acquisition, cash match is any amount you anticipate spending out of your funds to purchase a property. In-kind match would be the value of donated property, and HCP grant dollars would be the amount you anticipate spending in grant dollars to purchase property. As you fill in the amounts, you can select Save and Continue to calculate the totals at the bottom. There are multiple levels of calculations happening on the form, so you may have to hit Save and Continue twice or completely reload the page. An error will pop up if you have not provided sufficient match. Remember, 3% will be added to your grant request for grant administration. You will also need to match those funds at the same 2-to-1 ratio. And finally, project documents. We will request more detailed project documents in stage 2, but for the eligibility review, we are requesting documentation that the project is supported by the organization's governing body and that you have site control. When you select Save and Close, you will notice that some of the information you inputted appears a bit differently. In particular, a summary of your grant funds requested appears in the Request Summary box, and the cost categories information you entered displays as a table instead of a list. Once you've completed the entire form and attached all required documents, you are ready to hit Submit. Please note that while you are in edit mode, selecting Save and Close will not forward your application. It only takes you out of edit mode. You must hit this Submit button after Save and Close to forward your application for review. Once you hit Submit, the application will move from Draft Applications to Submitted in the left-hand menu. You may need to refresh the page to see this change. You will also see this note at the top of your application. You may submit stage 1 at any time before the stage 1 deadline for an earlier review and response by program staff. Once HCP program staff has reviewed your stage 1 application and you are found to have met the eligibility thresholds, you will be invited to submit your full proposal. Your application form will again appear in the draft application section of the left-hand menu with all of the information you submitted previously with additional instructions and information requested. Click Edit to begin working on the full proposal. You can see more sections have been added in the table of contents. Under organization information, you may adjust the listed personnel if needed. In the attachments section, you will see the options to include many more documents that will give the advisory committee a more clear understanding of your organization. While they are not required, they can provide information about your organization's sustainability and can help demonstrate that your organization understands and uses appropriate best practices for public access to history. In the next 3 sections, Request Summary, Geographic Focus, and Related State Projects or Funding, there is no new information requested, but you may adjust the information you provided in Stage 1 if needed. Under Consultation, you will provide information about ongoing outreach efforts since you submitted your Stage 1. For tribes, update the table with any additional outreach efforts you have made and attach documentation of that outreach and any tribal responses. For instance, let's say I heard back from potentially affected tribes 1 and 2, but not tribe number 3. I would need to send a second letter to the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer and the tribal chairperson, and then upload those documents. So the responses from tribes 1 and 2 and the second letter sent to tribe 3. For DAP, you must enter the date of determination and enter DAP's determination as listed on your EZ1 form. Then attach any further consultation with DAP and a copy of the EZ1 form, such as a letter from DAP and the completed EZ1 form. In the cost categories section, you may change the amounts you provided in stage 1 if you wish. Be aware that you must attach bids and estimates that support the numbers you enter, along with a full project budget that gives more details about the specific project costs, which will be asked for later in the project document section. The next section is new. The purpose of the non-state funding sources section is to demonstrate how you have received or will receive the income that will serve as your match. You should list information about how funding was obtained, not account balances. Non-state funding sources may not include any funding that was spent as part of any other state grant project or any other funding from the state budget, like a direct appropriation. HCP grant dollars cannot be matched with state funds or any funds used as match for a different state grant. Use the plus button to add a funding source. Be aware you must attach accompanying documentation for each entry you list, which provides proof that the funding source is either in hand or committed. Each single source over $10,000 in value must be listed on its own line with its own documentation. For sources made up of multiple items less than $10,000, you may group them together and submit a summary document. Please see the guidelines document for more information about what constitutes sufficient documentation for these funding sources. Let's enter a funding source. A major individual gift, the year it was earned, the amount, and documentation of the gift. We'll add a couple more. Let's go ahead and save the form. You'll see the total non-state funding I've entered so far is $80,000. You can also see this warning that the minimum amount of non-state funding I will need to provide, which is 75% of the required match, is $154,500. I've provided $80,000, which is about 38 or 39%. Let's add more to get up to 75%. For funding sources that span multiple years, put the year timeframe in the source name and use the most recent year as the year the income was earned or received. Let's save and continue to update the totals. You can see now that I'm at 181,000, which is more than 75%. If we hit save and continue again, the warning will disappear. You must list at least 75% of your non-state funding sources at the time of application submission. The remaining 25% must be added prior to the execution of your contract, should you be awarded a grant. When the non-state funding sources are at 100%, they will be equal to or greater than the required match amount. We'll hit save and continue to update the total, and we're at 210,000. When you leave edit mode, the non-state funding sources section will display as a table showing the cash and the in-kind and the total. You should be sure that the cash and in-kind numbers match the cash and in-kind of your cost categories. Let's go back into edit mode to continue. The scope of work section is next, starting with a scope summary. The project summary you entered in phase 1 is minimal detail. The scope summary here is medium detail, and then the elements of work will be the highly detailed area. The scope summary should provide a summary of the work, reference the elements of work you will be inputting below, and explain why the project is necessary. Remember, all project work that will be paid for with either grant dollars or any of your match must be included in the scope of work. In the Elements of Work section, you'll provide a detailed description of your project broken down into individual elements of work. There is no set list of elements. Each applicant should propose elements of work that make sense for their individual project. For instance, elements of work may follow the chronology of a contractor's proposal: foundation work, then structural work, then framing, then roofing, etc. Or it may follow the spatial considerations of the project, such as parlor restoration, kitchen rehabilitation, porch reconstruction, etc. As you decide what your elements will be, keep in mind that projects awarded funding will be regularly reporting on project progress using these elements of work as a basis for their status reports. Use the plus button to add an element of work and accompanying detailed description. The descriptions of work within each element should give detailed information about the specific materials, techniques, equipment, etc. that will be used and who will be performing the work. If you are doing rehabilitation work on a historic building, it is especially important to be clear about what historic materials are being repaired versus what historic materials are being replaced, and provide a detailed description of the comparable materials with which they are being replaced. If you need to edit an existing scope of work, use the edit link to make the window pop up again. Based on the entire scope of work, you will then provide a timeline for major project milestones with dates, including the date you plan to begin expending state grant funds. Please also include milestones that may have already been completed and indicate what date they were completed. The next section is history standards. It is important that the public access to history and historic preservation funded by Heritage Capital Project grants are in alignment with field best practices and include interpretation of history. All projects will select one set of professional standards for interpretation, exhibits, programming, collections, etc., to effectively provide public access to history. Applicants should identify other professional standards that apply to their project, particularly if projects involve specialty properties such as transportation conveyances, cultural landscapes, archaeological sites, etc. Any projects involving historic preservation will also be required to adhere to the Secretary of the Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties. This section will automatically display if your project involves a historic property. Organizations are not expected to have completed any particular assessment or be currently implementing any particular plan at the time of application. Rather, the goal is for each organization to improve the public's access to history by adhering to or working toward field best practices from wherever starting point they may be at. If your organization is already following best practices, great. Give a summary of how you are doing that. If there are areas that need improvement, describe your plans for that progress. For example, a grant application to build a new museum could propose an initial goal of developing an interpretive plan in a certain period of time, while as the organization matures, a later goal could be creating a schedule of history programs or exhibits produced for the next 3 years. Remember, awarded organizations are required to continue upholding history standards throughout the 13-year monitoring period, so what you propose must be sustainable. For more information about history standards, please refer to the guidelines. As I mentioned, if your project involves a historic property, you must follow the Secretary of the Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties. In this section, you should refer to your elements of work and explain how they follow the standards. For instance, if you must replace historic materials, be sure to explain why they cannot be repaired and why the replacement materials you have proposed are appropriate and meet the standards. In this section, you may also want to convey the experience and qualifications of your selected contractors in working with historic buildings. Next is historic and cultural significance. This is where you can provide a brief history of your site and its historic and cultural significance. Be sure to describe how the property's significance has evolved over time, and please note there is a character limit on this question. The historical designation information imports directly from your property profile. If it is incorrect, you should save and close this application form and navigate to the property section in the left-hand menu to update it. Then confirm whether or not this project will undergo local historic review. If so, provide the contact information. Another good time to save and continue. The next section is the project narrative. These narrative questions directly relate to how your application will be scored by panel reviewers for community value, project planning, fulfilling the program purpose of providing access to history, organizational capacity, and long-term stability. You'll note that all the questions in this section have character limits. In the first question, describe your organization's readiness to initiate and complete the project. Include a description of what would happen to the project if you do not receive any HCP funding this cycle and how you would proceed in the future. In the second question, describe the qualifications of the proposed project team. Please note, this is a narrative section and you should not copy-paste information from resumes in this section. You may submit resumes in the project document section if you wish. In the third question, describe the community value of the project and how it will provide public access to state and local history. And finally, in the fourth question, describe the plan in place for maintaining the history standards you proposed for the 13-year monitoring period. This includes how you will continue to interpret and share history, as well as provide appropriate preservation maintenance to the structure. Let's go ahead and save the form. In the project document section, you will see a new list. As mentioned before, at a minimum, you must upload an overall project budget and bids and cost estimates that support your budget numbers. Architectural and other planning documents are strongly encouraged, and other documents that will better convey your proposed project and its purpose to the advisory panel are optional, but will be helpful in your ranking. And finally, you will upload publishable digital images related to the project, preferably ones that are high resolution, meaning they have a large file size, that will help convey your project and its importance to the advisory board. We recommend that you include an image of each exterior side of each structure, detailed photograph of specific areas that are in need of rehabilitation, and at least one context image of the property site, preferably from a public right-of-way. Image file names should provide a clear label identifying the contents of the image. If a photographer credit is required, include their name in the image file name. Have your image files labeled and ready to upload as a batch in the pop-up window when you hit the plus button. Remember, multiple people linked to the same organization can log in to look at, edit, and review the application at any time. Once you've completed the entire form and attached all required documents, you're ready to again hit submit. Once you hit submit, the application will again move from draft applications to submitted in the left-hand menu. You may need to refresh the page to see this change. And you'll again see the notification at the top of the form that your application has been submitted. If you have any questions about the contents of the application or what is required, please consult the very detailed grant guidelines document first. Then, if you still cannot find answers to your questions, contact HCP program staff. Thanks so much.